My name is Irene Barry, and I was 13 the year my family left for Florida without me. Not a misunderstanding, not a "we'll come back for you in an hour." They packed matching suitcases, and a brand new DSLR for my older sister Jasmine's content reminded my younger brother Liam to bring his seashell bucket from last year, and left a crooked sticky note on the fridge. "Stay with a friend. Back in a week. Love you." No friend was named. Love didn't sign its name. I waited on the porch with my backpack like a lost parcel. Streetlights blinked on. The neighbor's dog treated me like I was loitering on my own steps, and the silence inside our house grew teeth. By 9, I microwaved a burrito and tried chewing without tasting the ache. People imagine favoritism is a loud thing. Fireworks and parades for one child while the others are booed. Ours was quiet like a faucet drip. You stop hearing until the ceiling caves. Jasmine got the varsity jacket, the latest phone for safety, private tutors for her future. Liam got braces, pony rides, and parents who learned to clap on beat at every school assembly. I got to be responsible for dishes, responsible for not needing anything. Being 13 meant pretending not to notice. On day 6, I was walking home from the library with a stack of books braced against my ribs like armor, when a black sedan slowed beside me. I froze. In our neighborhood, shiny cars meant wrong turns or trouble. The window slid down. A man in a slate jacket leaned toward the passenger seat. "Kiddo, that you?" The profile flicked the match in my memory. Uncle Richard, Mom's brother, the man who hadn't graced a Thanksgiving table in a decade because, according to Mom, he was too arrogant for family gatherings, which I now suspect meant he kept boundaries and brought receipts. "Where are your parents?" he asked, eyes taking in my library stack, my frayed backpack, my attempt at a smile. "Florida," I said, "with Jasmine and Liam." He blinked once, the kind of blink that absorbs a blow and files it for later. "And you?" "Staying with a friend," I said, and my laugh came out like a cough. "I just haven't figured out which friend yet." He swore softly, not at me, at the air. "Get in." Every safety lecture I'd ever heard lined up like crossing guards in my head, but I knew him, and my stomach had been living on noodles and hope. The sedan smelled like leather and cologne and something else. Fresh coffee, maybe. He took me to a diner that had chrome trim and pies under glass. When the waitress set down a burger, fries, and a milkshake, I almost cried. I'd forgotten how it felt to be handed something warm without a condition attached. Richard didn't pepper me with yes or no questions. He asked the kind that require a belief. "What do you like at school? Who makes you laugh? What do you notice that other people don't?" "History," I said, picking at a fry. "But only the parts people get wrong, like how everyone thinks Napoleon was tiny." He leaned back, studying me the way some men study stock tickers. "So you like the margins? The footnotes?" I nodded. "They're where the truth hides." He didn't smile exactly. He lightened, like a room when someone opens a window. "Eat. Then we'll figure the rest out." "Am I in trouble?" The question slipped out before I could catch it. Where I came from, help was the first stage of a later invoice. "If you are, it's not with me." He waved for the check. "You're coming with me tonight." The words clipped the world in half, before and after. Before was the porch, the sticky note, the dog that barked like I was trespassing on my own life. After was a guest room that felt like a cloud, a kitchen where the orange juice came in glass, and a man who said guardian like it was a job he wanted. I sat on the edge of the made bed, hands hovering above the duvet. Richard knocked once on the door jamb. "You planning to sleep sitting up like a vampire?" "I don't want to mess up the sheets." "Kid, it's called laundry. Around here, things are for using." He glanced at my pile of library books. "What are you reading?" "Things about people getting erased," I said before I could stop myself. He went still, then pointed to the nightstand. "Tomorrow I'm getting you a journal. Monogrammed, if you want. Write down what you notice, especially the parts people pretend not to see." He turned to go, then paused. "You're not a tenant. You're my niece. If it's in my house, it's yours too." I didn't cry. Not then. I waited until the light under the door went dark and the new house smell, polish, coffee, a hint of cedar, wrapped around the old ache. Then I let a few tears into the pillow and told myself I was just hydrating. The first breakfast was a ceremony in ordinary things. He poured me orange juice in a real glass, set a plate in front of me, like he did this for someone every day. At home, we drank from plastic cups stamped with the names of fairs we never attended together. You like school? He asked, like an answer wouldn't ruin the morning. No one's asked me that like it matters, I said, then wanted to swallow the words back. I mean, yeah, debate's fun, or I think it could be. No one had ever let me try. He tapped the table with his knuckle. We'll go to the next meeting. I'll sit next to you at school if you want me to. The offer made my throat tight. Parents are supposed to do that, I said. Not accusing, not even wistful, just the fact as I'd learned it. They were supposed to take you to Florida, he replied, not unkindly. Facts aren't feelings, Irene. Both count. He kept showing up. He signed forms. He spoke to teachers. He made a dentist appointment and didn't make me feel like molars were a luxury. He left a leather journal on my bed with IB pressed in gold and said, "Write even the dumb stuff, especially the dumb stuff." I wrote about the way the house didn't creak at night. I wrote about juice and glass. I wrote about how I had never been so scared of being happy. When my parents got back, I expected banging on Richard's door, an argument on the front steps, their favorite sport, performative outrage. Instead, days turned to weeks, and the phone didn't ring. Jasmine posted beach photos with captions about finding herself. Liam posed with the world's ugliest sandcastle. Our group text, the one I was always somehow muted in, pinged with a family selfie under palm trees. No, wish you were here. Not even a lazy next time. Richard noticed me noticing it. He didn't pry the phone from my hand or tell me not to look. He just slid a plate of leftover pasta across the counter at midnight and said, "Maintenance. Bodies first. Hearts take longer." I ate, and in my journal, I wrote one line I didn't fully understand. This is the first night the house didn't feel like it would spit me out if I breathed too loud. Weeks later, after my first debate meeting, he sat in the second row, clapping like I'd cured something. He took me along to his office. Not a showroom, not a movie set, just a place where people shook hands, solved things, and got coffee at the same time every afternoon. He made me watch how people started sentences, where they stopped, who looked at the floor when they lied. Half of success is tone and grip, he said. The rest is showing up when no one else does. In the elevator, he caught me staring at a plaque listing partners' names. "You're not a question mark," he said, touching the back of my slouched shoulders. "Stand up. People believe you more when you look like you believe you." I straightened. It felt like stealing someone else's spine, until it didn't. I still checked the family group chat sometimes, the way you check a bruise to see if it still hurts. It did. But the pain changed shape, less a knife and more a weather report I could dress for. One night, he found me on the balcony with the journal open to a blank page. "What's the holdup?" he asked. "What if I write the wrong thing?" He looked out at the city. "Paper is where you practice being real so you can survive rooms where people aren't." "Rooms?" I echoed. "Offices, mostly." He smiled like he could see a day I couldn't. Sometimes rooms with lawyers where people say very polite things that mean very ugly things. The line snagged on something in the dark. A future that smelled like leather and rain and expensive silence. I tucked it into the spine of the journal, a pressed leaf for later. If you'd stopped time in that doorway, 13 sticky note daughter turned niece with a key, I would have told you this was the end of my story. Rescued, fed, seen. But stories with lawyers don't end at rescue. They end in rooms. And in one of those rooms, years from now, every head would turn toward me when a man in a careful suit said, "To my niece, Irene Barry." I didn't know the exact words yet. I only knew that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting on a porch for someone to remember I existed. I'd been invited in. I planned to stay. By the time spring rolled in, I'd been living with Uncle Richard for 4 months. The quiet no longer scared me. It steadied me. The house didn't echo anymore. It hummed. Richard had a way of turning ordinary routines into lessons without sounding like a teacher. Breakfasts were mini board meetings. "What's your plan today?" he'd ask, stirring sugar into his coffee. "At school." "At life," he'd correct. "You can't just show up. You show up as someone." I didn't always know who that someone was, but I pretended I did. He never babied me, but he didn't test me either. When I failed a math quiz, I waited for disappointment, the kind I'd grown up bracing for. Instead, he asked, "You want help or you want to sulk first?" That was his rhythm, practical compassion with a sense of humor. At first, I couldn't bring myself to touch half the things he bought for me. The new backpack, the shoes still wrapped in tissue paper, even the crisp notebooks stacked on my desk. They looked like props in someone else's life. When he realized I'd been eating cereal dry at midnight instead of using the milk in the fridge, he appeared in the doorway one night, half asleep but determined. "You rationing food in my house now?" I froze with the spoon midair. I didn't want to waste it. He crossed his arms. "If it's in this house, it's not waste. It's yours. Got it?" I nodded, throat tight. He walked over, poured the milk himself, and said quietly, "You've been in survival mode too long. Let's try living mode for a bit." That was the first time I felt the knot in my chest start to loosen. At school, things began to shift. Teachers noticed when I raised my hand. Kids started sitting next to me at lunch, not out of pity, but because I'd finally stopped trying to disappear. When the debate club announced tryouts, I signed up, mostly because Richard said, "If you argue with as much passion as you do about brushing your teeth, you'll win." He showed up in the audience that first day, front row, tailored suit, applause like thunder. I stumbled through my argument, but when it ended, I caught his grin. It said, "You tried. That's enough." Afterwards, over pizza, he told me, "You know why you did well? You didn't try to sound smart. You tried to sound real. That's rarer than genius." I rolled my eyes. "That's corny." "Corny and true often travel together," he said. The journal, my IB initials gleaming in gold, became my second spine. I wrote everything. How orange juice in glass made mornings taste more human. How the house smelled like cedar and quiet. How my parents still hadn't called. Every week, Richard asked to read one page, never more. He'd underline a line and say something cryptic like, "This one's a truth. Keep it safe." One night I wrote, "I think I'm scared that being happy means I'll owe someone later." He underlined that twice and said, "You don't owe people for loving you right, Irene. You owe yourself for learning it late." By the time I turned 14, I wasn't that invisible girl anymore. My posture changed, my tone changed, even the way I entered rooms shifted. Richard used to tap my shoulder whenever I slouched. "You're not a question mark," he'd remind me. You're a sentence that ends in a period. Complete." At school, someone joked that I walked like I had security guards. They didn't know my guard was an uncle with more patience than most saints and a sarcastic streak a mile wide. Then came the holidays. Christmas used to mean background noise, wrapping paper chaos, Jasmine's endless photos, Liam's new toys. That year, it meant a quiet living room, soft carols, and a tree small enough to fit in the corner, but big enough to fill the space with light. Richard handed me a small box wrapped in newspaper. Inside was a leather pen, engraved with "Keep Writing." "Nothing flashy," he said, "but you'll need a good pen if you're going to rewrite your life." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. That night, while other families posted their picture-perfect dinners, I got a group text from home, Jasmine opening her laptop, Liam holding up expensive headphones, and my mom typing "Merry Christmas" from all of us. No name tags. No "Hi, Irene." I stared at the photo for a long time, waiting for sadness to crawl in. Instead, I felt relieved. For once, I wasn't part of the performance. Richard noticed the silence. "Missing them?" I shrugged. I don't think they'd even notice if I replied. He nodded slowly. "Then don't waste the ink." I smiled. "Ink's for people who read." He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. That spring, he started bringing me to his office during school breaks. I thought he just wanted an extra set of hands, but it was training disguised as errands. He'd hand me papers to file, then quiz me on what the numbers meant. "Always know where the money actually goes," he'd say. "That's how people hide what they don't want you to see." At 14, I didn't realize that lesson would one day save me from signing away everything I had. He treated every task like a seed. I didn't see the garden yet, but he did. "Half of success," he told me once, "is tone and grip. The rest is showing up when no one else does." I wrote it in my journal that night, right under a new line of my own. Sometimes showing up is the bravest thing I know how to do. As months passed, my fear of taking up space started fading. I stopped flinching at kindness. I started believing that good things might actually stay. When the school year ended, I handed Richard my report card. Mostly A's, one stubborn C in geometry. He looked it over, nodded, and said, "Excellent. Now tell me what you learned that isn't on paper." I blinked. "You mean outside class?" "Exactly." I thought for a second, then said quietly, "That being seen feels like flying, but you have to build your own wings first." He smiled, eyes softening. "Then we're making progress." That night, I wrote the line again in my journal, underlining it 3 times. Outside, the city hummed, and I realized something quietly miraculous. I wasn't the forgotten kid on the porch anymore. I was becoming someone worth remembering. By the time I turned 17, Uncle Richard had turned his house into a second kind of school, one where lessons hid in everyday moments. He didn't just teach me manners or money. He taught me what power looked like when it was quiet. He called it invisible leverage. When people underestimate you, he said one morning while flipping pancakes, that's your advantage. Don't correct them. Collect data. I learned to listen first, talk second, to observe who flinched when the truth showed up. That habit of noticing became my compass. College was supposed to be a dream for Jasmine, the golden sister. Our parents had been saving for her tuition since kindergarten. Liam would get the leftovers, as always. I wasn't in the plan at all. If not for Richard, college would have been a fantasy scribbled in the margins of my journal. He sat me down one night with spreadsheets and a cup of coffee that smelled like dread. Scholarships first, grants second. My help fills the cracks. You'll work for what you keep. Deal? I nodded. Deal. I applied for everything, even the weird ones. Scholarships for left-handed people, descendants of beekeepers, students named after flowers. I wrote an essay about honey that made Richard laugh so hard he said, "You could sell this to a cookbook publisher." When the acceptance letter came, with partial scholarships and a dorm assignment, I didn't cry. I just stared at it, numb, because for the first time, something good hadn't been followed by a catch. Move-in day, he carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs in a tailored shirt and sneakers that probably cost more than my laptop. Parents around us were crying and taking photos. Mine didn't even text. Richard clapped his hands together after setting the last box down. There, you're officially a college student. Try not to become an urban legend. I grinned. No promises. He laughed, then got serious. Remember what I told you. You can enjoy today, but don't bankrupt tomorrow. Financially or emotionally? He smirked. Both. When he left, I stood at my dorm window watching his car shrink down the road. The loneliness that followed wasn't the kind that breaks you. It was the kind that proves you've outgrown what once did. College was awkward. I felt like an imposter among students who'd grown up assuming the world would make room for them. I was still learning how to take up space politely. But hard work has a smell. It's like ink and determination, and people notice it. Professors liked me. Classmates started asking me to lead study groups. I joined the debate team again, made a few friends, and once, I even laughed without checking who was listening. That's where I met Ethan. He was the kind of calm that made noise nervous. Engineering major, steady voice, eyes that saw details the way I did. We started out as library partners, both pretending we weren't noticing each other's jokes. He asked me out one night after our 3rd study session. Dinner, not as classmates, as something else. Something like what? I teased. Something I don't want to mess up by defining too soon. I said yes anyway. Ethan was patient in ways I hadn't known existed. When he learned about my family, he didn't pity me. He asked questions that didn't sting. He met Richard over Thanksgiving break, and they hit it off immediately. 2 versions of quiet confidence measuring each other and finding respect. Richard pulled me aside afterward. He's solid, he said. Don't let your fear of debt make you sabotage a good investment. Investment? I laughed. He's a person. Exactly. But the calm didn't last. Ethan's ex-girlfriend, Tessa, still floated around campus, a social butterfly with perfect hair and a habit of making accidental remarks loud enough for me to hear. Things like, "Oh, you're the scholarship girl, right? Ethan used to tutor kids like you." I learned to smile and walk away, but inside, something old, the ghost of being forgotten, scratched at the door. One night, I told Richard about it during our weekly call. "She's just trying to see if you'll flinch," he said. "Don't. Let her wonder what you know that she doesn't." I followed his advice. The next week, Tessa tried again at a cafe, hinting that Ethan and she were basically family. I opened my journal, tore out a page I'd written months ago, a quote from Richard. "If they try to erase you, write your name louder." I left it on the table as I stood to leave. She read it, blinked, and didn't speak to me again. By sophomore year, Ethan and I were solid. I kept my grades up, worked part-time at the campus office, and called Richard every Sunday. He never missed a call. Sometimes he'd say, "Proud of you, kiddo." Other times, "Don't forget to live a little." Once, when I confessed I'd been up all night studying, he sent me $40 with a text. For something stupid, preferably with sugar. That was Richard, equal parts wisdom and sarcasm. At 21, I graduated with honors. Richard sat in the front row, clapping louder than the dean. He gave me a fountain pen and whispered, "Use it to sign something that matters." I laughed. "Like what?" You'll know when the paper's heavy enough. I didn't understand it then, but I would. After college, I landed an internship at a logistics firm. Nothing glamorous, but steady. I became the one who fixed problems no one else wanted to touch. Richard called it my firefighter phase. He'd invite me to dinner, grill me on everything from workplace politics to time management. But sometimes, mid-conversation, he'd rub his shoulder like it hurt. "You okay?" I asked once. "Just old joints complaining," he said, waving it off. I wanted to believe him. I did. But little signs started stacking up. The pill organizer on his counter, the skipped dinners, the half-finished cups of tea. The man who had rescued me from silence was starting to live inside one. When I asked if he needed help, he laughed. "Doctors just tell you to eat less salt and stop yelling at the news. I'm fine." He wasn't. A month later, he fainted at work. When I arrived at the hospital, he was joking with the nurses, IV in his arm, charm still intact. "Don't look so dramatic, Irene. I told them I just wanted a free night's stay." But behind the jokes, I saw it, the truth he didn't want to name. That night, he turned serious. "You know, I always figured your dad would be the one teaching you all this, but I'm glad it was me." I blinked fast. "Don't talk like that." "Like what?" he said softly. "Honest?" He shifted, wincing slightly. "Listen, life's short, but you," he pointed at me, "you already outran the version they tried to make of you. Never forget that." Then, because he couldn't leave me with sincerity alone, he added, "And if you cry on my hospital sheets, I'm sending you the dry cleaning bill." Typical Richard. Even from a hospital bed, he refused to make pain the headline. He recovered enough to go home, but I knew. The clock had changed tempo. The last holiday we spent together, he gave me a box. Inside was my old IB journal, filled, but not by me. His handwriting covered every page, notes, advice, sarcasm, even doodles. On the final page, one sentence stood alone. "If they ever try to erase you again, remember this. You've already written your own chapter." I read it twice, heart trembling. "You wrote in my journal," I whispered. He smiled. "Borrowed it. You'll need those words someday." At the time, I thought he meant encouragement. I didn't know he meant evidence. Because soon, that journal would sit in my lap in a lawyer's office while my parents waited for millions that weren't theirs. And every word inside it would remind me who I'd become and who I refused to be again. Richard passed quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday morning. The call came just before dawn. His assistant's voice trembled as she said the words that would redraw the shape of my world. "Irene, he's gone." For a long minute, I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. The city outside kept humming, indifferent. Coffee shops would still open. People would still laugh at things that didn't matter. But for me, the ground had been rewritten. Handling his funeral felt like muscle memory. Like every crisis I'd survived had trained me for this. I chose the suit he liked best, the hymns he used to hum under his breath while shaving. I made sure there were roses, not lilies, because he always said lilies smelled like endings. The service was small and quiet. His colleagues came in dark suits, speaking with the soft gravity of people who'd lost not just a boss, but a steady compass. A few friends told stories that made the room shift between laughter and tears. I stood by the podium, steady, reading a eulogy that didn't sound rehearsed because every word had already been lived. And then, just when I thought I'd made it through without breaking, my parents walked in. Mom's perfume arrived before she did, the expensive kind she saved for occasions. Dad wore the same politician's smile he used for PTA meetings, the one that said, "We're the respectable kind." Behind them trailed Jasmine, still flawless in grief, and Liam, fidgeting with his phone. They looked around like they'd stepped into a movie set. Mom spotted me first. "Oh, sweetheart." She pressed her hand to her chest, as if shocked to find me among the living. "We had no idea you were so close to Richard." I swallowed. "You didn't ask." Dad cleared his throat. "Your uncle was a remarkable man. Generous, successful, truly part of the family." Family. The word landed like a joke no one laughed at. I thought of the sticky note on the fridge, the porch, the dog barking. Now suddenly, standing in the glow of his legacy, I was someone worth noticing. Before I could respond, Jasmine leaned in with a bright, calculated smile. "So, do you know when the will reading is? I mean, Uncle Richard was loaded, right?" Mom gave her a sharp nudge, but not out of shame, just bad timing. Then Liam, ever the echo, added, "Yeah, maybe he left something to the family, to keep things intact." I looked at them, these strangers who'd once shared my last name, and realized they weren't grieving, they were circling. Predators in black. I didn't bother answering. I walked past them, leaving their questions hanging like cheap perfume. The calls started the next day. Mom, we should reconnect as a family, Irene. It's what Richard would have wanted. Dad, there are responsibilities now. Adult matters we should handle together. Jasmine, hey sis, just checking in. We should talk about estate stuff. Liam, a text message, 3 heart emojis and a thumbs up. If it hadn't been so transparent, it would have been funny. Then came the email from Mr. Halpern, Richard's lawyer. The reading of Mr. Carlton's will is scheduled for next Monday, 10 a.m. He was very clear about his wishes. I expect it will be eventful. I read the word eventful 3 times. It felt like a warning wrapped in politeness. That night, I opened the leather IB journal, the one now filled with Richard's handwriting, and flipped to the last page again. If they ever try to erase you again, remember this. You've already written your own chapter. I smiled through the ache, because I knew what he'd done. I didn't have the details yet, but I could feel it. The signature, the structure, the precision. Richard had built his life like a ledger, everything accounted for. And the people who once left me behind with a sticky note were about to find out what accountability looked like in print. The morning of the will reading, I dressed deliberately. Not in black, but in charcoal gray, the color Richard wore when he wanted to make a point without raising his voice. The law office smelled like leather and quiet. Heavy curtains, chairs too stiff to be comfortable. A room designed for patience and power. Across from me sat my parents, Jasmine and Liam, their posture a blend of entitlement and fake sorrow. Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue that still had its price tag. Dad nodded solemnly at the lawyer, as if they'd shared history. Jasmine crossed her legs like she was posing for sympathy. I set my journal on my lap, spine warm under my hand, heartbeat steady. Mr. Halpern entered, glasses low on his nose, papers in hand. Thank you all for coming. We're here to read the last will and testament of Mr. Richard Carlton. Dad straightened, already rehearsing his gratitude speech. Jasmine adjusted her dress. Liam's knee bounced with anticipation. Halpern began with formalities. Debt settlements, donations to charities, small gifts to employees. My family's faces twitched with impatience. Finally, he turned a page. Now, regarding the distribution of Mr. Carlton's estate, the air thickened. To my estranged relatives, Halpern read slowly, who only remembered my existence in the shadow of my bank account, I leave nothing. The silence that followed was pure theater. Mom gasped. Jasmine's mouth dropped open. Liam blinked, as if he'd misheard English. Dad managed a strangled, "Excuse me?" Halpern didn't flinch. He was very clear. He continued reading, voice calm, deliberate. To my niece, Irene Barry, who was left behind at 13 but never left my side since, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all properties, accounts, and holdings. For a moment, no one breathed. Then every head turned toward me, just as Richard had once predicted. Jasmine spoke first, voice high-pitched with disbelief. That's not fair. She manipulated him. Mom hissed, Irene, how could you let him do this? You know he wasn't thinking straight toward the end. Dad slammed his hand on the table. You poisoned him against his family. You twisted his mind. I looked up slowly, meeting each of their eyes in turn. My voice came out steady, quiet, and sharper than I intended. You did that yourselves, the day you left me with a sticky note on the fridge. Liam opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Halpern cleared his throat. The will is airtight. Mr. Carlton's wishes were explicit. Any attempt to contest will be dismissed immediately. The final snap of his folder echoed like a gavel. I stood, smoothing my jacket. The room felt different now, lighter, like a door had opened. Mom called after me, her voice cracking. Irene, wait, we're family. Surely you'll share something. I paused at the doorway and turned, not out of cruelty, but closure. 15 years of silence didn't sound like family to me, but you're right about one thing. Richard always cared about maintenance, so here it is. Maintain your distance. And with that, I left. Outside, the winter air felt alive against my skin. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over Ethan's contact. He answered on the first ring. Hey, you okay? I'm fine, I said, smiling through the ache. He made sure of it. There was a pause, then his gentle voice. Irene, he'd be proud. I know. I looked up at the sky, gray but clear, and whispered into the cold. Wish you'd seen their faces, old man. If heaven had Wi-Fi, I knew Richard was laughing his head off. The journal felt heavier that night when I set it on my desk, not from guilt, but from gravity. Every line in his handwriting was a receipt for love done right. And somewhere between grief and freedom, I realized He hadn't just left me money. He'd left me proof that being forgotten once doesn't mean you stay that way forever.